Welcome to the Essentially You podcast. Dr. Cleopatra, honey, how are you doing today, girl?
So good. I love hearing your voice. So excited to be here with you.
I am so excited. I'm so excited that we're going to continue our conversation around pregnancy, but actually we're going to step into the fourth trimester today. And a trimester that a lot of women try to navigate with as much grace as possible. But we know there are a lot of factors. Not only do you have this new baby who's just trying to survive out in the world, and everything is focused on him. Mama's trying to recover. She's trying to breastfeed. She's trying to work that situation out. And just because you did it the first time or the second time doesn't mean it's just going to work out the third time or however many times. Every time it's a whole new adventure. And then we've got a plummeting of hormones that was keeping our hair luxurious and our mood good. And now all of that just went down the drain. I don't know why, girl.
Literally.
And so, if anything, it's really the fourth trimester is that 3 months where women's bodies are changing dramatically. We don't even really feel necessarily at home in our bodies at this time. And we're trying to navigate it as much as we're trying to ensure that we're keeping this brand new baby alive. It's a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot. Okay, so first of all, I have to say that this setup is one of the reasons why I love you so much. You are so real and you express reality with so much flavor and humor, and I love you so much.
Oh, thank you, honey. Oh, that's just me freaking out about the fourth trimester. Girl, I'm heading there. It's like a freight train to the fourth trimester right now. Just chugga. I'm trying to get there, but I'm not trying to get there at the same time.
I agree with you.
Okay, let's break it down. You are my literally fertility goddess. You're my super baby goddess. But this is a time where I feel like women are not really, we're just not taken care of as well as we could be taken care of. And, it's so hard for us to take care of ourselves because we're so focused on trying to take care of that baby. Okay, so talk to me about what did I not uncover and how do we start to navigate this with or without the right type of support?
Yes. Okay. So much here. So let's first break down something that you said, which is that this is a time in the fourth trimester when we aren't cared for as women as much as we could be. And I think that we could say that of both bookends of a pregnancy. So the trimester is really the beginning of the pregnancy, even before the first trimester. And the fourth trimester, or the postpartum period, is the end of a pregnancy. And it's almost like those two periods, especially the trimester, but also the fourth trimester, are invisible to society. And in the fourth trimester, when society is recognizing it, they're really focused on the baby and the well-being and the growth of the baby, which obviously are so critical. And there's no way for a mom to be well in fourth trimester if her baby isn't growing beautifully. And similarly, it's much easier for a baby to be growing beautifully and adjusting to being in the outside world when mama is doing awesome and feeling supported. And so the first thing that I want to say is to really pay attention to the kind of support that you have in your life and that you don't have in your life before you get to the fourth trimester, so that you are not surprised. If you get really clear and take an inventory of the support that you do and don't have, and in the trimester protocol, we actually do a support map for this very reason, so that people can identify where they do and don't have support and then seek out the support that's missing from their support map.
So first step is really understanding and identifying support. And where do we really need support? One, I know that meals, meals are important. Feeding mama is important, especially if mama's breastfeeding, super, super critical here. That is probably one of the hardest things. Like, who wants to be cooking when they got to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and so that's another area. Helping around the house, because, taking care of the baby is a full-time job.
Full-time job. And anybody who thinks that they're going to go and start working immediately just because they're home, I think that is such a misconception. We know it in our language when we say someone's a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad or parent, and we think that that means that they're not really working, that they don't work. But actually, when you're at home, you are working nonstop. So if you're going to continue to try to work or for your company or run your business or whatever it is that you do, that's a really hard expectation that you're putting on yourself and probably setting yourself up to fail. So I just want to say that it is full-time work to take care of your baby and to take care of yourself in the fourth trimester. So give yourself the spaciousness of not having the expectation that you're going to send a bunch of thank you cards or you're going to stay on top of your email or deadlines or whatever it may be. If you have the luxury of doing that, obviously, not everybody has the luxury of doing that. So when we talk about the kinds of support people need, I think that you touched on some really important things, like having very practical, tangible support, like someone helping with meals, someone helping with keeping the house in order. There's a ton of laundry to do when you have a new baby. You change your baby many times a day. All of a sudden you'll be like, how can someone so little produce so much laundry, doing dishes, all of that kind of stuff? This will be a time when it will be challenging at moments to carve out the time to brush your teeth, take a shower, let alone sleep. And when you haven't been able to do those things yet, you definitely don't want to be cleaning the house and trying to answer emails. That's for sure.
Mm. Good to know. Absolutely. And I'm sure a lot of moms were like, yeah, I gave that up. House wasn't getting cleaned.
Yeah.
All those things went to the wayside. Maybe I showered that day. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's so true.
That's so true. And I think when you say they gave that up, that's really important, because if we were honest before they got to that point, then they would know not to expect that of themselves in the first place. And then it would be a much easier, more graceful, and less painful process, as opposed to feeling like you should have done all these things, and finally after a couple weeks or a couple months of beating yourself up for not doing all of the things you believed you were going to do while you were at home and had all this time, you give up. So just being able to be real about what the experience is like, so that people have more realistic expectations of what that period is going to be like. And I think that what's really important about this is to be real, but not be doom and gloom, because guess what? We hear two very polarizing or opposite ends of the spectrum messaging when it comes to being a mom and being a parent, especially a new mom, which is either it's all peaches and all magic and unicorns, or your life as you know it has ended.
Or
and
just wait.
Yeah, exactly.
I cannot tell you, girl, how many times people are like, just wait. I was like, you can take that just wait and put it somewhere else.
That is not helpful. So that's not what I mean about painting a realistic picture. The reality is that having a new baby and being a mama, being a parent, is all of that. It is beautiful. It is the most meaningful and important thing we will ever do with our lives if we choose to do it, or we get the blessing of doing it. And it is also one of the most challenging things that we will ever do. And there are a lot of things that are not particularly glamorous about it. What you see on Instagram does not necessarily reflect reality. We don't all look like that after we've delivered a baby. Most of us look very swollen. We don't all have our bodies back to our pre-pregnancy weight and size when we're 6 weeks postpartum, or even 6 months postpartum, or maybe even 6 years postpartum. And I think that it's important to remember those things. So let's be real and honest about our experiences, but we don't need that just wait, because that is so not helpful. It's going to be beautiful, but you are going to have moments where you feel like you're not good enough, you feel like your partner's not doing enough, you feel like you don't have the help and support you need, you wonder how you're going to get through another night of not getting enough sleep. But let's talk about sleep, and let's talk about one of those forms of support. If you are somebody who knows that you cannot cope with anything less than 8 hours of sleep, that you are prone to anxiety and or depression, or your brain just can't function, or you get snappy, or you just feel like you can't even stay awake if you wanted to. Know that about yourself and seek out that type of support that will help to buffer you and your baby and your family from that, because we all have to know what our limitations are. So I don't have a particularly difficult time functioning without sleep. And so that wasn't a big issue for me. But there are a lot of women who know that they cannot cope with less than 8 hours of sleep. And if that's the case, then a really good idea is to seek out a postpartum doula or a night nurse who can be there taking care of your baby overnight and allowing you to get a little bit more sleep than you would with a newborn otherwise. Now, if you're breastfeeding, there's still going to be the issue of maintaining your milk supply, which means that you still will need to wake up and pump milk or nurse your baby, but it's not the same thing as waking up with your baby all night long.
Mm. Or even just having some type of partnership, schedule. Maybe your husband stays up later, or maybe he gets up a lot earlier, or maybe your partner gets up earlier, whatever that looks like, to kind of navigate how that's going to look. And, I know that times are definitely different. We have partners that are working in tandem with each other. It's not like it used to be where like husbands and partners were babysitting their kids.
Which is ridiculous. If you think about it, it's not babysitting when it's your own kid.
It's not. Let's talk a little bit about some of the postpartum blues and the postpartum concerns, especially around our hormones. We know that progesterone and estrogen take the biggest dive of our lives, honestly. Like, it's not even like menopause is a gradual decline.
Exactly.
Delivering a baby, it's literally off the cliff.
Yes.
And women will never experience that level of hormonal, kind of a hormonal crashing down as they will when they deliver the baby. And then we know that other things can happen. Thyroid can be off depending on what is going on. So how can we support our hormone levels or try to get back to some equilibrium? I know that it can take well up to 3 months or more to kind of get back to normality.
Yes, absolutely. It can take much longer than that, depending on a number of factors, including whether you're breastfeeding and if you're exclusively breastfeeding and for how long. And we can talk a little bit more about breastfeeding. But when it comes to prevention of postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and postpartum psychosis, which is less well known or not talked about as much, but is also a risk factor.
It's real. I've known multiple women who've had postpartum psychosis.
Yes.
And doctors even who've had it, because I thought it was very rare. And then all of a sudden I had friends who went through it.
It's less common than postpartum depression and anxiety. People don't talk about the postpartum anxiety as much either, which is probably even more common.
I was going to say, probably guaranteed.
Yes. So there's a saying that worry is the work of pregnancy, and worry is really the work of parenting. And there's no time that you feel it more when you've just given birth, because all of the hormonal changes that you're going through and how rapidly your body is changing leave you feeling very vulnerable. And then experiencing the kind of love that you will experience for this human being. And if you're a first-time mom, this is the first time that you're ever experiencing this degree of love for something or someone. Even when you're madly in love with your partner, it's not the same. And experiencing that and loving something so much and it being small and dependent and what you perceive to be fragile. Their babies are not nearly as fragile most of the time as we perceive them to be. They're super strong and resilient for the most part. But that combination of factors leaves you feeling very vulnerable. And that vulnerability just fuels the tendency toward anxiety that women who are new moms can be prone to. So I just want to normalize that experience. It's not that you're going crazy or that there's something wrong with you. It's very normal to be a little bit on edge, a little bit fearful, a little bit anxious when you have a new baby. But if it is debilitating, if it's interfering with your functioning, if it's leading you to feel like you might hurt yourself or your baby, or it's just distressing enough, then that is absolutely something that you want to seek out help for. And don't wait for too long. A really interesting story is that I will have a mama who has now a 14-month-old baby who we helped her to have, and she had difficulty getting pregnant. She had one miscarriage after the other, and then for years couldn't get pregnant and tried IVF multiple times, was told she would never have a biological child again. And she had one child already, and that she needed to use an egg donor. And she came to me, and from our first conversation, I could see that she was still suffering from postpartum depression from her first baby. This is now 3 years later. When we worked on that, she got pregnant, and they said it was not even humanly possible for her to get pregnant again. And she went on to have a perfect baby. And so it is not the case that postpartum depression has to happen immediately. And it can go on, and it can be painful, but acceptably painful enough that you endure it and think that this is just part of your new life stage. And I don't want anyone listening to allow that to happen to themselves. So if you're feeling off, I want you to make sure that you seek help and you get the help that you need. From a scientific perspective, what we know is that the rate of postpartum depression, which is the thing that is most commonly studied or most well studied, has gone up exponentially. And we believe that there are a number of factors related to modern life that have contributed to that. So number one, that saying, it takes a village, it comes from somewhere. It is real. We need a village surrounding us, supporting us as parents, especially new parents, but throughout the parenting life cycle. And we need a village supporting us as we raise our children. And so the way we live in modern life is that we are much more isolated, even if we feel really connected because we live in a big city that's densely populated and there are constantly people around us, or we feel really connected because we're on social media and we have constant social connection, whereas in the past we didn't. The depth of the social connection and the depth of the support is lacking in the lives that we lead today. We are often away from family. We don't live in multi-generational households, which in other ways can be a really good thing that we aren't living in multi-generational households. But when it comes to being a new parent and raising children, that can be more of a risk factor because you don't have the same level of support and you don't necessarily have the same level of trust in the people who are supporting you. As complicated as your relationship could be with your mom or your dad or your other relative, for example, you probably really trust your baby with them as opposed to someone you're paying to help you or whatever. So that's one thing. There's also the reality of the way that we eat in modern life that has strongly contributed to postpartum depression being on the rise and postpartum anxiety and psychosis as well. One part of that is the ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s in the standard Western diet and how we have much more omega-6s as compared to omega-3s in our diets. And we know that supplementation of omega-3s can help to prevent postpartum depression.
So true. Yes, I know that food plays a big role. A lack of support plays a big role. And I know that this pandemic isn't doing us a lot of favors either. You know, we're definitely much more isolated than ever before. I think the one positive that could be the case is if your partner is home with you, where they may not have been home with you. I've had friends who have had partners that have been home since they had babies in June.
Yes.
And we're so grateful. But then again, like mother circles, you're not really able to do that unless it was over Zoom. You know, those are a lot of things that have really shifted for us. Let's talk more about food. Let's say, you know, it's not like we can And I know that in some instances, potentially natural progesterone has been recommended to some women if they feel like that progesterone crash actually, like I mean, clearly we know what happens. But if you're really struggling, a topical natural estrogen could absolutely be very helpful. But other supplementation can be really helpful as well to help support not only our neurotransmitters, but I mean, I would say that, we already know that women are depleted. And I would say a woman in fourth trimester is probably definitely depleted. She's not sleeping very well. She's got a lot going on. If you're breastfeeding, you're just, all your nutrients is just going right through to the baby. And so let's talk a little bit about not only nutrition, but also supplementation for mama to keep her on that healthier side, especially the mental well-being.
Yes, absolutely. So you made a really good point. Let's talk a little bit more about the hormonal profile that's happening in the fourth trimester and tie that into food and supplementation. Mm-hmm. So we know that estrogen and progesterone are dropping so precipitously. And you can think of the same kinds of things that we talk about for helping to regulate a cycle or maybe even support fertility in terms of seed cycling. So we know that flax seeds and pumpkin seeds are sources of natural estrogens, and then sesame and sunflower seeds support progesterone levels. So those would be good things to incorporate in your diet immediately following giving birth and throughout the fourth trimester and even beyond. So what people don't know is that when you give birth and either you're nursing or you still have milk supply, because it takes about 6 weeks for milk supply to dry up if you choose not to nurse your baby, is that you are semi-menopausal. You are in a semi-menopausal state. So your fertility hormones tend to be very low. That includes your estrogen and your progesterone. And then your prolactin is very high. Okay. That's the hormone that helps you to produce the milk in the first place. And so one of the things that can happen is that if you are feeling like you're depressed, you're anxious, you may benefit from having some bioidentical progesterone supplementation. If you want to be able to nurse your baby and to have a plentiful milk supply, exclusively nurse your baby, then you just have to be mindful of how these fertility hormones do impact your milk supply. For some people, it will be inconsequential. I have a milk supply that will not quit. My baby is 2 years old. I haven't nursed him in 8 months or more. I still have milk. Some people are like that. Other people's milk supply is so sensitive and finicky that any little shift can create dips in milk supply, which if you really want to nurse your baby exclusively can feel very stressful and even kind of catastrophic in those moments. So I just want to mention that caution that anytime you incorporate some bioidenticals or natural sources of hormones, that you want to know that it has the potential to impact that balance that can affect your milk production. Doesn't mean it will, just pay attention to it. So that's number one. You also mentioned that the thyroid, and that's really important. So we want to really be feeding and nourishing the thyroid in the fourth trimester, because pregnancy and giving birth can easily impact the thyroid. It happens for many people. They might see themselves become hyperthyroid, or for most people, they become hypo. So that's one of the reasons why you want to be looking closely at your thyroid during pregnancy and also after you give birth. So be sure to go in, have some blood work, have a full thyroid panel, see what's happening with your thyroid if you're feeling strange in any way, or even just as part of your routine postpartum care, because you want to be catching that if something is starting to shift. So things that we know are really beneficial for feeding and nourishing the thyroid are micronutrients such as zinc, selenium, and vitamin A, for example. Also, you want to be looking at your iron levels as well.
Yeah. I agree 100%. I loved you talking about the omegas. I think B vitamins are going to be critical. B vitamins are huge for postpartum depression. Magnesium, especially for anxiety, and, magnesium glycine in particular, because glycine is also very, very calming, especially taken at night. Those are some recommendations. And yeah, I mean, the thing about low thyroid or thyroid dysfunction is that it looks a lot like just postpartum,
Yes.
but if you start to see hair loss, you start to, clearly the brain fog is a guarantee during that fourth trimester. So that's really difficult to be like, oh, maybe it's my thyroid. No, I'm not sleeping. Or constipation or gut issues, like any of those types of things.
Or weight issues, right?
Yeah, weight issues. Almost 25%, I think, of women have some type of thyroid abnormality coming out of their, in the fourth trimester. And sometimes it doesn't really rear its head until like after the 3-month mark, where women are like, now my hair's falling out. Now I'm starting to see all these symptoms. That's always the flag to go and look at and see if it's your thyroid. Whereas your doctor is probably just going to tell you that, like, getting older is normal, that this is just a normal part of postpartum. So just a heads up to just cue those things up, because we know that the thyroid also can contribute to postpartum depression and anxiety. So just there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the lack of sleep also is fueling all of this. Right? There's the big shift in hormones, lack of sleep, more worry. Your life has really changed. You also want to be paying attention to your gut health. Mm-hmm. And I would just say, as a PSA, make sure that you're using the bathroom, having a bowel movement as soon after giving birth as humanly possible to prevent all kinds of painful things happening in the future. So be prepared for those things, and don't wait for the hospital to give you a stool softener in order to adjust to what's happening in your body. Be prepared for those things and plan accordingly, just like planning for the support. Putting in place an appointment for your blood work for after you give birth is a really good idea, something that you can do before you go into labor, so that that's already there. It's already in your calendar, and you can prevent a lot of things when you just do a tiny bit of planning in advance. And the other thing that I think we don't talk about enough is that when you have a new baby, because of the lack of sleep and lack of bandwidth, because you're learning all kinds of new things about taking care of them, it's hard to learn new pieces of information about taking care of yourself. It's hard to do planning at that time. So as much as possible, get this information and get this planning in place during your pregnancy, and don't rely on the fact that it's going to be easy for you to do that during the fourth trimester, because it's actually going to be more challenging. In the fourth trimester, it's like you're in this incredible love cocoon. And if you're so fortunate, if you're somebody who doesn't have to go back to work 2 weeks after giving birth, which I wish for every woman in the world, and you're in this love cocoon, there's just a lot of sitting and feeding and cuddling and dozing off and eating, just like super basic human needs for you and the baby are what you're focused on. You don't have to get your workouts in as soon as the doctor clears you for exercise. You don't have to start having sex as soon as the doctor clears you for sex. At 6 weeks, the doctor might say you're healed and you're ready for sex, and you might be like, oh my God, do not come near my body right now. And it is not a failure on your part. It is not something wrong with you. Your body, you just grew and birthed a human, and your body is healing, and your body is changing rapidly, and your life has changed rapidly, and you're sleep deprived, and you may not want to be touched. At least you may not want to have intercourse. And that's absolutely okay.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, let's just talk about that 6-week visit.
Yes.
That only 6-week visit, and then off you go. Like, you know what? It's embarrassing that that's it. You know, how many visits do we have leading up to the birth of this baby? And then one 6-week visit, and ta-ta, go off and do you. It feels so inappropriate on so many levels. That's where I'm at with that.
Well, I want to say that I feel like all the clearance that happens in the 6-week visit is a very masculine, capitalist approach. And I'm sure that's going to sound controversial. And
no, I think every woman who's in that 6-week visit is just like given the side eye to that doctor. I feel like there's a knowing.
Exactly. Well, and
tell me after just 6 weeks, I'm barely getting by over here that I'm cleared for everything, cleared to go become like mega superwoman, cleared to go start doing my womanly obligations. Like, what is this?
You're like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, I really feel that way. And I love my OB. He's amazing, but he's male. He has never given birth.
No, he hasn't.
The majority of OBs still are male to this day in 2020. And I do think that if they had the experience of giving birth, they might be a little bit less conclusive that you're cleared for your full exercise
full duties and full life duties. Get back to it.
You're all good. And, I think that message can be so harmful. And so that's why I brought it up. Like, if you're cleared and you don't feel like you can exercise yet, that you can have sex yet, that you can go back to work yet, then I really, really hope that you're able to not do those things until you want to do them. Now, that being said, I highly recommend making yourself put your clothes on and get up and go outside for a walk with your baby in the stroller or holding your baby, wearing your baby in a carrier, because that is actually something that is going to work wonders for you and your baby. It is an incredible tool for preventing postpartum depression and anxiety, moving moderately, gently, and getting outside, getting some sunshine on your skin, or even if it's not warm or sunny outside, getting some fresh air is also really soothing for your baby. And so I do recommend, even if you feel like you don't want to do it, to have that be part of your day-to-day life in the 4th trimester, to just get up and go outside for a walk.
I agree. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if it's even possible, you just have a couple hours to yourself, in those weeks. As one of my best friends always used to tell me, she's like, no matter what, like, just have your own moment, like, whether it's like, she's like, I don't care if you're going to Target, I don't care if you're going to go grab a latte or whatever.
To the bathroom by yourself. Even that, taking a long shower. My hair takes a long time to wash, and I have 3 super babies. And I just remember that it was hard to find enough time to be able to wash my hair, because I need at least an hour and a half to do it. And what I think is really important, my 2nd and 3rd postpartum periods, or the 4th trimester with my 2nd and 3rd babies, I should say it more clearly, were much easier because we already had a nanny. We already had the infrastructure for taking care of children. With the first baby, it's much harder. And one of the things that you can do in mapping out your support is include having some paid childcare, even in those first weeks and months when you think you're going to want to be with your baby all the time. Because more than likely, you're going to be around the house, but at least you can take a nap. You can take a long shower. You can read, or you can talk to a friend if you need to talk to somebody. You could have a little date even in the house with your partner if you have a partner. And I think that it's really valuable to get that in place in advance, as opposed to waiting until the baby's already there to then start looking for a nanny or a babysitter once you are preparing to go back to work. I think it's much more stressful to do that. And why not give yourself the ability to do that if you're able to?
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Dr. Cleopatra, honey, you have given us so much to consider today, especially as we're navigating, wherever we're at in our pregnancy journey and getting prepared, especially with these unprecedented times. I think the more that we have these conversations, the more that it just opens the door for possibility for women to really set ourselves up for success. And every single one of us deserves that. Where can we get more of you, my dear?
Please come visit me at the Fertility and Pregnancy Institute website. That's fertilitypregnancy.org. We have so many incredible resources for the trimester, for fertility, and also for pregnancy and postpartum and beyond. And I would like to leave our mamas with just one last nugget that nobody tells you about, which is, in order to ensure that your milk supply is plentiful, one thing that you can do is breastfeed your newborn every hour on the hour for the first 72 hours. It's a lot of work initially, but pays off in dividends in terms of the amount of colostrum, which is like baby superfood that your newborn is getting in those first 3 days, and then also sets you up to have an incredible milk supply. Everyone can use this except for in the case of a baby who's born early, who's born low birth weight, which is anything under 5 pounds, 8 ounces, or who's born with any type of health problem or difficulty regulating body temperature, because that takes a lot of energy, as does nursing. So if your baby's still figuring out blood temperature or body temperature regulation, don't do that. But otherwise, that is something that you can do that will pay off for you and your baby tremendously.
Thank you so much for that little tip. I know we were trying to get to breastfeeding today, but I know the whole conversation around postpartum is so critical as well. So yeah, I appreciate that.
You're so welcome. So happy to be here with you again.
Thanks, honey.